Bueno, hola a todos, muy buenas tardes. Gracias por acompañarnos. Mi nombre es David Galarza, yo soy el director general del Asset Management de Actinver, desde acá, desde México, en las oficinas corporativas en Montsurales. Y el día de hoy tenemos el gusto de presentarles a todos ustedes, a nuestros colegas, socios globales, responsables de la gestión de nuestro fondo Escala, que es el objetivo particular del foro el día de hoy. Entonces, para entrar en materia, permítanme presentarles a las personas que nos acompañan el día de hoy para posteriormente dejarles las cámaras y los micrófonos. En primer lugar, está con nosotros Juan Carlos Leiva. Juan Carlos es responsable desde Franklin Templeton aquí en México de la relación comercial que guardamos entre Franklin y Actinver, y es, digamos, también el responsable de la dirección y coordinación de nuestros socios y las firmas que conforman a Franklin Templeton, particularmente el día de hoy de Western Asset. Contamos también con la presencia de Alfredo Ríos. Alfredo se encuentra en este momento en Nueva York. Él es parte del equipo de Western Asset y es el director de relación comercial institucional justamente de Western Asset a través de Franklin Templeton, y particularmente el contacto que tenemos para toda la atención del fondo Escala acá en Actinver. Y bueno, por último, está con nosotros Stephen Sibley. Él es el Portfolio Manager Senior de la estrategia del fondo Escala desde Western Asset, también en el Trading Desk en Nueva York. Y será la persona junto con Alfredo, que después de que Juan Carlos los introduzca mejor que yo, nos haga la presentación de la estrategia del fondo, de lo que está sucediendo con los rendimientos, de qué está pasando con los mercados en este 2022 que han iniciado bastante revueltos, cuáles son las expectativas del fondo de aquí hacia adelante y bueno, qué pueden esperar ustedes los inversionistas de nuestro fondo que nos acompañan el día de hoy, ¿no? Estaremos recibiendo sus preguntas a través del chat. Juan Carlos será la persona responsable de administrar esas preguntas y hacérselas pasar a Alfredo y a Stephen. Y bueno, trataremos de ajustarnos al tiempo establecido, de tal manera que si sobran algunas preguntas sin responder, haremos un alcance con ustedes para vía escrita hacérselas llegar. Así es que sin más, les agradezco mucho, Juan Carlos, Alfredo, Stephen, muchas gracias de verdad por su tiempo, por darnos la oportunidad de estar de manera virtual con ustedes y de este acercamiento valiosísimo con nuestros inversionistas del fondo Escala. Se los apreciamos muchísimo. Y adelante, Juan Carlos, te dejo la palabra.
Pues muchas gracias por la presentación, David. Bueno, mi nombre es Juan Carlos Leiva y en nombre de todo el equipo de Franklin Templeton y de Western Asset, les damos las gracias por acompañarnos este ratito. Esperamos que sea un momento muy productivo y de mucho valor para todos ustedes. Voy a compartir pantalla y en lo que se comparte, bueno, ya nos presentó brevemente David. Del equipo de Western Asset nos acompaña Alfredo Ríos. Alfredo es Client Service Executive, ya tiene más de 25 años de experiencia atendiendo a clientes institucionales por parte de Western Asset. Y Steven es Portfolio Manager de estrategias de crédito con más de 30 años de experiencia trabajando en este tipo de mandatos. Western Asset es uno de los equipos de inversión más importantes que tenemos en Franklin Templeton. Fue fundado en 1971, ya cuentan con más de 50 años de experiencia como líderes en el mercado en estrategias de este tipo. Son especialistas en análisis y en la administración de portafolios de renta fija global. Y bueno, a partir del 2020 se unen a la familia de equipos de inversión de Franklin Templeton con la compra de Legg Mason. Hoy Western Asset administra más de 450 billones de dólares con inversiones prácticamente en todo el universo de renta fija global, ya sea deuda soberana, grado de inversión, high yield, etc. Alfredo, cuéntanos un poquito más de cuáles son las estrategias especializadas que tienen, ¿no?, en Western Asset.
Con mucho gusto, buenas tardes a todos y gracias por su tiempo. Gracias, David, gracias, Juan Carlos. Western Asset, como mencionó Juan Carlos, es una gestora de administración de activos con un proceso de inversión y una filosofía activa, es decir, trata de generar una rentabilidad superior al índice de referencia en todas sus estrategias. Esta lámina es indicativa nada más de las categorías de activos en donde tenemos mandatos, en donde generamos alfa o valor agregado a las carteras de nuestros clientes, y van desde lo que es duración corta, duraciones de 1 a 3 años, o incluso desde fondos de money market con liquidez diaria, hasta productos de crédito estructurado, títulos hipotecarios, deuda municipal, y lo que son inversiones alternativas líquidas o que no tienen índices de referencia y que se miden en base a retornos totales. Son estrategias de mayor volatilidad típicamente, están acompañadas con mayor retornos también, y vamos a hablar hoy particularmente de estrategias de crédito grado de inversión en Estados Unidos, que es lo que hace el portafolio Escala. La siguiente, Juan Carlos. Esta lámina es simplemente para las personas que no conocen a Western Asset, uno de los principales proveedores de gestión activa en renta fija a nivel global, por tamaño y por rentabilidades históricas. Estos son algunos de los premios que hemos recibido recientemente y que nos da mucho orgullo compartir con ustedes. Listo. Déjenme presentarles, por favor, a Steve Sibling. Steve tiene 30 años de experiencia en el mercado de valores en Estados Unidos. Ha estado con Western muchos años también. Pero déjenme, por favor, pasar a inglés porque el español de Steve no es muy bueno. Steve, let me switch to English. I just said that your Spanish is a little rusty, so I wanted to introduce you as our senior portfolio manager for the Western Asset Corporate Bond Ladders strategy in general, and primarily we will talk about Escala. We want to acknowledge that it's been a challenging year, that you will have questions. We encourage you to please ask all the questions that you have, that you're thinking about, that keep you up at night. We'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. But we do understand that there's concern in the performance, in the strategy, the market environment, and we would like to share our outlook with you. With that, Steve, let me pass it on to you.
Okay, thanks, Alfredo. And I think, a good place to start out, and I apologize, I do not speak Spanish, so being a little rusty is a little bit of an understatement. But, first off, I just want to thank everybody for taking their time to join us today in this. It's, as Alfredo said, you take a look at the economic backdrop, you take a look at the financial markets, you take a look at the geopolitical situation. It's a really challenging environment out there right now. So we really do sincerely appreciate your taking your time to listen to us today. I think a good place to start off is I'm on page 9 here, just talking about our what this strategy is, and this is the definition of a bond ladder. And laddered portfolios, typically we'll offer advantages over a self-managed portfolio, as if there is a strategy involved. And what we like to do is create a nice stream of income in a low volatility environment. Income has definitely been the positive this year. Volatility has been very, very challenging. And, end of 2021 into 2022, that's where our challenges have been, is in the volatility within the markets. So what exactly is a ladder? A ladder is what we do is we buy high quality corporate bonds out to a maximum maturity of 5 years. So essentially from 1 year to 5 years. And we buy those in equal increments. And the advantage that ladders have over a strategy where we would be trading, this is a buy and hold strategy. So the intent is to buy the bonds and let them mature. And as assets come into the program, we buy more of the bonds. But when a bond matures, we're going to buy a 5-year bond in there. So what the thought behind a ladder is that we are not taking an active view on interest rates. And when I give a little bit of our outlook, we'll talk about how much rates in the U.S. have gone up this year, because we're not looking to sell anything. So while there might be unrealized losses in the portfolio, what we're really gaining here is the increased income within the portfolio. So like I said, this is high quality corporate bonds. They're all US dollar denominated. With that being said, we do buy Yankee bonds. And by Yankee bonds, I mean bonds that are issued by foreign corporations that are denominated in US dollars. So think of things like Barclays Bank, think of Toyota, just to name two as an example. So it is a very diversified portfolio. We try not to hold any sort of concentrated positions. And what we do is we try to take our firm view when those bonds mature and we're looking to reinvest. We're looking to reinvest in a sector that the firm is positive on. If we take a look at the portfolio right now, and it's been managed like this pretty much since inception a couple of years ago. We're heavily tilted toward banks. We think that banks, especially domestic banks here, think of Citigroup, think of Goldman Sachs, think of Bank of America. With coming out of the global financial crisis in 2008, the regulations on these banks are very stringent, and they offer a very nice yield or income within those. We also like the energy sector. I know, speaking to the folks down in Mexico, that your economy has a pretty strong tilt toward the commodity sector. So, it's well represented within this portfolio. So, essentially what we're trying to do here is you keep a steady stream of income within the portfolio. And like I said, up until probably about 5 or 6 months ago, we've been able to do that within a pretty low volatility environment. Definitely challenging this year. But it does feel like we've kind of come to a spot where volatility is starting to lower a little bit. So with that, that's the strategy in a snapshot. It's a strategy that a lot of people like because it's a good offset to volatility or equity risk in other parts of people's portfolios, and that's what we find. So, with that, I'll take a pause for a second and pass it back to Juan Carlos to see if we have any questions on the strategy before we move on to kind of an outlook and review.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. It's been a very challenging year and a half for fixed income. Last year, I think that I've never seen the whole universe of fixed income paying negative returns. The last 2021 was I think, horrible for many of you guys managing these kind of strategies. So regarding the latter strategy, this is an investment in U.S. assets, right? So what's your view on Mexican peso? Do you have a view, or what's your view on there?
Let me jump in here, Juan Carlos, and answer that. So the firm is constructive on the peso. We have overweights in some of our dedicated emerging market portfolios to the currency. We believe that in the context of emerging markets, Mexico is less vulnerable than other Latin American economies in the event that China, as a proxy or as a representation of emerging markets, does not grow as much as it used to, or as we're expecting to. So Mexico, yes, it has challenges. We understand the inflation and growth challenges, and we monitor Banco de Mexico very closely to follow what they do with monetary policy. It's a very delicate balance. If they increase too much, they run the risk of stopping the economy on its tracks. If they don't, inflation will be eating up yields and hurting holdings in pesos. So in summary, we believe that the Mexican peso is better positioned than other Latin American countries or currencies to withstand lower growth in China, again, as a proxy of emerging markets, but also a slowdown in global growth, which is likely to continue towards the end of the year.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I have another question here. This is a strategy that buys the securities direct, right? So it's not ETFs, it's It's a direct security strategy. What happens if you are unable to buy one of the bonds you like on the strategy?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question, because while the U.S. investment grade market, corporate bond market is a very liquid market, we're in a small subsector of that market, meaning that we're only investing at as far as 5 years. So there's a lot of competition to buy bonds there. So at times it is difficult to buy those bonds. So what we'll do, and we work with the folks at Actinver, David, and we will get a replacement security, and a replacement security we will look to buy will keep the integrity of the overall strategy, meaning that if we can't, we'll try to find a bond that has a similar characteristics and a maturity as the bond that we cannot buy, and we'll have a replacement bond in there. And the other thing I'll just add on there, and this is something that's happened in this portfolio quite often over the last year and a half, is that a lot of corporations in the United States have been going through their balance sheet management exercises, and they take a look at some of the bonds that they have offered out there, very high coupons that were originally issued when we were in a different interest rate environment. So a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but a few of the bonds within the portfolio have been called by these corporations, where they can reissue at a lower cost to the corporation. Something like we would do here in the U.S. as far as refinancing a mortgage. If mortgage rates go down, we'll refinance and do that at a lower mortgage rate. And when these bonds do get called, as portfolio managers, we like that because it's always to the benefit of the bondholder. So you get a very attractive levels or price when they call the bonds. And then the same thing, we're going to look to keep the integrity of the portfolio. If a bond is maturing in 2024 and it's a bank, and we'll look to reinvest those proceeds of a call in a similar bank in a similar maturity range.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is an investment grade strategy. You're carefully looking for the best ideas in investment grade. But what happens if by some reason one of the bonds we have on the portfolio gets downgraded to speculative, to high yield? What happens there? What do you do?
Okay, first off, I'll just say that thankfully that has not happened within this portfolio. But yeah, good question. I mean, we're going to work with our analysts on that, and get our view. And a couple of things that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the fundamentals of the corporation. Why did it get downgraded? And because it is high yield doesn't necessarily mean it is impaired. And by impaired, I mean that they're not going to be able to make coupon payments or be able to pay the bond at maturity. So we're going to look at the fundamentals, and we're also going to look at how long it is to maturity. If we think that it's a bond that's going to mature in 6 months, and we think fundamentally the corporation is fine, we're going to own the bond. We're going to hold the bond. We're not going to buy any more of the bonds. We're going to pick a replacement like we were talking about before. But if there is a situation where we think fundamentally over time this company could have issues being able to pay coupon and maturity here, we will sell. Once again, in the opening remarks, I said the intent is to mature everything in this portfolio and not to have to sell. And thankfully, that's been the case so far.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Antes de continuar tengo una última pregunta más. Le quiero recordar a la audiencia, si tienen alguna pregunta, pónganla en la sección de preguntas y respuestas y con mucho gusto las vamos atendiendo. So, I have a last...
Juan Carlos, perdón, también, si hay alguna pregunta en español, por favor, también envíenosla.
Perfect. I have a last question regarding the strategy. We are in a rising rate environment, okay? And do you only buy fixed coupon bonds, or do you also buy floating rate bonds?
Yeah, currently the entire portfolio is fixed rate bonds right now. We certainly can buy floating rate bonds right now, but due to there's technical natures in the U.S. right now that we're sticking with fixed rate at this point. But yes, certainly we can buy floating rate bonds.
Perfect. That sounds very good. So let's continue, Stephen, with the outlook. So if you can talk to us a little bit of how you're looking at the market, what's going on in the U.S. fixed income market. And let's see if we have some more questions from our clients.
Okay, great. And if you just want to flip to page 11, we kind of have our outlook there. I'm not just going to go down bullet by bullet on here. And, I think that, looking at Western, and I know there was an introduction there, but we like to take a longer term view on things and kind of look through some of the short term views that people have. We're looking for longer term trends than short term volatility. And, this has been our philosophy and process for over 50 years now. And my comments are going to be directed more toward the U.S. as this is a U.S. Portfolio. I know Alfredo had a little comment on the peso before, so we did say that, a little bit about the Mexican economy right now. But, when we talk in the U.S., we're really looking at three things in here. We're looking at growth, inflation, and the Federal Reserve. So coming into this year, and we're going to do a little bit of, last year coming into this year, then our outlook. Growth in 2021 in the U.S. was very strong. And if you think about that, we had a couple of things really working in our favor. We had, we were coming out of the pandemic, so a reopening economy. And, that only happens once. And let's hope that only happens once in our lifetimes here, because it's been a tough 2 years here for sure. But we also had a tremendous amount of stimulus, and not only in the U.S., but globally, if you think about a fiscal stimulus and also monetary stimulus. So we brought interest rates very low. We were giving money to citizens. So there was a lot working in favor of growth last year. Coming into this year, we knew growth was going to downshift a little bit in here, but it's downshifting from very high levels. In the beginning of this year, when we were talking about our growth forecast, we were talking about trend-like growth, and by trend-like growth, I mean 2 to 3% growth in the economy. And in the beginning of the year, we would say probably closer to 3%, and now we'd probably say closer to 2%. And why do we say that? And I'm going to bring this up a couple of times. It's the Russia-Ukraine conflict that's going on right now has downshifted growth a little bit more. So we still think growth is going to be okay in here, 2-ish type percent. We think that the reopening, it's been delayed a little, not derailed. And, when we talk about reopening, we talk about things like hospitality, we talk about hotels, we talk about airlines. And, there was a little bit of a pause when we had the second close down. So, once again, it's delayed, not derailed. So, trend-like growth this year. And then just to talk about inflation a little bit, and I think that's been the big miss at the Federal Reserve, and that these extremely high inflation numbers that we're having here in the U.S. Not going. There's a lot of different reasons: supply chains, stimulus, etc. And I think the miss was that while most thought early on that it was going to be transitory, we think that the Federal Reserve probably held on to that transitory comment, meaning that it was just going to naturally come down, quicker than we had expected. And if you go back to the mid of 2021, the Fed was more focused on employment, and that's the one thing that they really have got right here is the employment situation in the U.S. is very strong right now. But they made a very strong pivot in September of 2021, going from employment to inflation. And, inflation has definitely proven to be more sticky in the U.S. here. We think that it's going to still ease substantially throughout 2022. But it was a little bit of a delayed in it coming down. If you think about, the end of last year, 2021, November, December, while we still had elevated inflation numbers, we thought they were going to come down in the beginning of the year, and they did not. They kept going up. And once again, we're going to point back to Russia and Ukraine that, once that happened in toward the end of February, that really made inflation accelerate to the high side a little bit more. But where we thought it would be coming down at the end of last year, we finally just had some prints here, or some inflation numbers data in the beginning of May here, where it did show a month-over-month decline. But it was much smaller than people had been expecting. And, inflation is really the thorn in the side. And Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve here in the U.S. Had a speech today. And, that's really what they're going at right now. So with this inflation, the Federal Reserve really pivoted. And, at the end of the year, it was forecast that there might be 3 Fed hikes in 2022, and we've already had 3, and here we are in middle of May right now, and and maybe that's a good transition to talk about the Federal Reserve here. A couple things with the Federal Reserve is, like we said, feel like they're a little bit behind the curve in here. They're being very transparent. There were a lot of surprises last year from the Federal Reserve in some of their narrative or commentary. And that's what's really elevated the volatility within the market, especially, over this year when you take a look at where rates started the year and where they ended the year. So, the Federal Reserve had moved twice. So one 25 basis point move, one 50 basis points. And by 50 basis points, that's 0.5%. And they're out there essentially saying that they're going to move in June, they're going to move in July, another 50 basis points each, so another 1%. So from a more, typically the Federal Reserve moves in more of a structured way. But what they did was they're moving a lot of the increases in interest rates forward. So by that, I mean, they thought there was going to be a hike at every meeting, more marginal, and now it's really moving forward because they really need to get the inflation situation under control. So that's where the Federal Reserve is right now. If you take a look at it, the market, fixed income markets will always trade ahead of the Federal Reserve, meaning they're not going to wait for the Federal Reserve to hike rates for rates to go up. So what we've seen in this hiking cycle is we've seen a tremendous amount of hikes already priced into the market. So there are actually another 8 hikes priced into the market already, but the market is already expecting that. And that's why I was saying I think volatility is going to come down a little bit in here, in that the market has already priced this in. So, maybe I'll pause there for a second to see if anybody has any questions on our growth, inflation, or Fed outlook. And then I'd like to spend a couple of minutes just talking about the asset class that we invest in investment-grade corporate bonds.
Perfect. Yeah, we have a couple questions. Okay, so let me see. Correct me if I'm wrong. Inflation right now, it's pretty much offer-driven more than demand, right? So rising the rates, it might not be a very effective tool for the Fed right now. What other things can the Fed do to try to tame inflation? Right.
So this is the real conundrum or the difficulty right now, is that a good part of the inflation is supply side driven. So we've been talking about that for a year and a half now, and with COVID rearing its ugly head again in China, and China basically shutting down, there's concerns that the supply chain keeps going. But what we're looking at right now is they're really looking to try and get the demand side to come down. If you take a look at, as I said before, rates have already gone up significantly in here. So what the Federal Reserve is looking at is they're looking at financial conditions. So with the tighter rate environment, take a look at mortgages. Mortgages in the U.S. here are well over 5%, which we really haven't seen in quite some time in here right now. So what they're trying to do is take the financial conditions and make the demand side not as much need for the demand. Interesting, today in the U.S. we released retail sales numbers. So one would think with 8-9% inflation that retail sales numbers, people would stop shopping, but that's not the case. It came in pretty strong. On the flip side of that, Walmart, and Walmart is a massive company. They had earnings today, and the narrative coming out of their earnings was that inflation is really hurting them, and I think their stock was down about 9% today. So as we see anecdotal things like that, especially on the demand side, they need to get the demand side down.
Okay, perfect. And you already talked about the hikes and the Fed rates a little bit. Where do you see them in the midterm, and where do you see the 3 to 5 year curve in the midterm, and how these hikes and these movements in the rates will affect the strategy?
Right. So I think that the difficulty within strategy, so because we manage money for from 5-year maturity and in. And that area of the curve or interest rates is very, very dependent on Fed policy. Mm-hmm. So what we've seen is a significant increase in the front end of the curve. So the short duration, short maturity part of the curve. And right now, if you take a look at it with where rates are, let's call it between 2.5% and 3%. That's where the Federal Reserve is priced in right now. So, we think that right now we've kind of hit a floor, if that's a case of a better word, to where rates are. So I think that the incremental income that this portfolio is generating due to that increase in yields is going to be beneficial to the portfolio. And if you just take a look at the end of the year, so 12/31/21, the yield on this portfolio was 1.1%. Now it's 3%. So as we're reinvesting these bonds, we're reinvesting in much higher yields, beneficial to the portfolio. And also, if money is coming into the portfolio, if investors are investing in here, beneficial to the portfolio because you're going to be investing all the bonds at higher yields.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I have a couple questions on politics and stuff like that. Voters in the States are very sensitive on inflation and growth. And this is something that Biden, and the current government haven't been able to tame well. Nobody has. How do you think this can cost the re-election to Biden?
Okay, as a firm, we don't have a call. But I'll speak from a personal standpoint. I think it's definitely going to be an issue. We have midterm elections coming up in November, and from what I have been reading and some of the people that I follow, it's definitely going to be a change of government beginning in November, with President Biden's approval rate at very, very low levels. And if you look historically, we should see the House of Representatives switch over to Republican, and most likely we're also going to see the Senate. So, we'll have to see how that plays out. And then, if we take a look in another 2 years with the presidential election, there's a lot of time between now and then. But I think that the U.S. from a geopolitical standpoint right now, the narrative is that they're very disappointed in the current government, and they're not doing enough on the inflation front.
Yeah, and this could affect the way that the economy is being driven in the States, since right now there are majority on the Democrats, and if they go to Republicans, what change? Well, they could change the federal, support on the companies, stuff like that, and that could affect, the economy in a different way.
Yeah, a lot of things like taxes could come up. One thing that I don't think we're going to see is any more stimulus. I think that's what most are pointing, a fair amount of this inflation to is the extra stimulus package that was done last spring. But one thing, and I'll just take it one step further here. If you think about it, and there is definitely a camp of economists out there that think we're going to go into recession, that we're not going to have the soft landing here in the U.S., that the Federal Reserve is going to, need to keep hiking rates, and it's going to make us go into an inflation. And that's really not our call right now, because we think that the consumer and also the state governments are in really, really good shape right now, and they're going to be able to keep us from going into a recession. And I'm always going to hedge myself on a comment like that, and that maybe if we had this comment in 3 or 6 months, a call like this, that can definitely change. But, right now, we're not in the camp that we're going to go into inflation. There's some that think recession, not inflation. Some people think that in the beginning of 2023, first half of the year, we might go into a recession. And that's not our base case right now.
Okay. That was my next question. How feasible do you see a U.S. recession? But that you answered that, Ray, so thank you. And I have a last question on inflation and politics. Today, they announced a lifting in some restrictions on Venezuela, particularly on the oil stuff, right? So this seems like it's an effort to get cheaper energy from the United States to try to battle inflation. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this could work to tame inflation on the energy side? It's a hard question.
There's a lot of things. Yeah, there's a lot of things on the energy side. I'll go back to Russia, Ukraine. That caused another issue. But there was already energy inflation before that took place when Russia invaded Ukraine. So while there are some people in the government that are blaming it all on Russia invading Ukraine, that was the second leg up in inflation. There's a lot of restrictions here in the U.S. And a lot of people are looking to go toward green energy. And all at the cost of traditional energy. So I think that the Venezuela, and I didn't see that, so thanks for pointing that out. But I mean that's a positive. I'm on Thursday. I have a 9-hour drive to go to my son's college graduation. So nobody likes to pull over to fill up with $5 a gallon of gas. So the cost on that has gone up significantly, and things like that are a very regressive tax. Like inflation. It impacts the people that, the lower income people much more than it does higher income people. So I think that's a positive step. I think that, President Biden wants to talk to OPEC. Unfortunately, they don't really want to take his call right now. So there's some negotiation has to go on there. But regulations in the U.S. are really harming us as we're trying to move toward a green energy country. Which I'm not against by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that it has to be done in a little bit more of a measured way. It can't be this way or that way. I think we have to kind of lean our way into that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Alfredo, you want to share something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Steve mentioned, going back to the original question on politics. That's also a big consideration for voters, and they will express that come November. Energy independence and being less dependent, of course, on foreign powers, and lower energy prices are always conducive to bigger margins in the companies and more and bigger corporate profits, and people tend to be happier with that. So that's also going to be a big factor in the next elections.
Perfect. Thank you. David.
Sí, Juan Carlos, acá hay varias preguntas de mi lado en el chat. Si les parece bien, te las leo tal cual están en español y tú me ayudas a traducírselas a Stephen.
Venga, gusto.
La primera de ellas dice, ¿cuál es la estimación del rendimiento para este año del fondo? ¿Y qué podemos esperar para lo que resta del año? Nada más para actualizar, el fondo Escala, con todo esto que ya explicaron muy bien, recordarle a nuestros inversionistas que la relación entre tasa y precio de interés de los bonos es inversa. Es decir, cada que las tasas de interés suben, el precio de los bonos cae por consecuencia. Entonces, con la subida que ha habido este año en las tasas de interés en Estados Unidos, en donde particularmente la referencia a 10 años del Treasury pasó de 0.75 a finales del año pasado a niveles incluso por encima del 3% en algunos momentos de este año. Entonces el fondo trae un rendimiento en dólares negativo, una minusvalía este año de menos 3% en directo aproximadamente. Entonces, bueno, puntualmente la pregunta, Juan Carlos, es ¿qué estimación de rendimiento hay para lo que resta del año? Y pues bueno, ¿cuál es la perspectiva en términos de desempeño del fondo en los siguientes meses?
Perfecto. Alfredo, yo creo que sería una pregunta excelente para ti. ¿No? ¿Cómo ven la evolución, ¿no? de aquí vamos a decir, a cierre de año para la estrategia?
Sí. Steve, so the question is, what is the expectation for the fund in terms of performance for the remainder of the year? Just from where you stand in terms of return and yield.
Right. So I think that from a return perspective, we want to point back to the yield because this is a portfolio that we're not actively trading. So with the yield around 3%, and our view that the Federal Reserve hikes for the rest of the year are pretty much priced into the market, we would point back to that 3% in local return.
Okay. Sí, 3% en retorno local aproximadamente, no en retorno, sino en yield. Y algo que es importante mencionar es el ingreso que está generando la estrategia, más que el retorno total, porque hay varios factores que afectan al retorno, y en la medida que las tasas sigan subiendo, como explicaste bien, David, va a haber una posible minusvalía en los precios de los bonos, el subyacente que tiene el fondo. Sin embargo, también es importante recalcar que la calidad crediticia de esta estrategia, de este portafolio, es grado de inversión de Estados Unidos. Son las calificaciones más altas que hay en la escala de calificación crediticia, y el sector, y Steve va a hablar ahora también del sector y de los fundamentales y la fortaleza que tienen a pesar de la economía. Entonces, sí, yo quiero recalcar que la estrategia sigue siendo un buen diversificador con respecto a posiciones en pesos y en posiciones en otras categorías de activos, como pueden ser equities, como pueden ser bienes raíces, como pueden ser inversiones alternativas, commodities, etcétera. Sigue siendo un buen diversificador. Hay volatilidad extraordinaria en este momento, por la inflación que hemos mencionado anteriormente, y también por el evento geopolítico entre Rusia y Ucrania, que ha exacerbado los precios de algunos commodities y que ha venido a desestabilizar las escalas de precios en muchas categorías de activos. De hecho, las correlaciones se han afectado como no habíamos visto en mucho tiempo. Y algo clave en este sentido es que en la medida que la posición se mantenga en el fondo, no se realizan pérdidas. Hay mark-to-markets, hay valoraciones que se están afectando con la subida de los bonos y la volatilidad, pero en la medida que no se venda, no se realice la pérdida, el fondo va a seguir generando estos yields, estos ingresos constantemente hasta que venzan los fondos. Bonos, perdón.
Sí, de acuerdo. Y bueno, algo bien importante, David y público, es que este fondo, si bien ha tenido un año bien difícil, está valuado en dólares, ¿no? El año pasado, en la pandemia, o el antepasado, mejor dicho, pues el dólar se fue a 24 pesos por dólar, y desde ese punto máximo hasta ahorita hemos tenido momentos de alza y de baja, pero la tendencia ha sido a la baja, ¿no? Hoy tenemos un dólar, si mal no recuerdo, y corríjanme por ahí, abajo de los 20 pesos, ¿no? Correcto. Entonces, eso también ha hecho que el rendimiento en pesos sea afectado, ¿no? Entonces, tenemos aquí los dos juegos, el juego de que las tasas han subido y el juego del tipo de cambio que ha bajado, ¿no? Digo, creo que es a la gente que le gusta invertir y tener su guardado en dólares, es un buen momento para ver el tipo de cambio a largo plazo.
Entendido, de acuerdo. Bueno, esta segunda me la aviento yo. Acá nos preguntan cuáles son los montos mínimos de inversión para este fondo, para la estrategia, y cuál es el tiempo de permanencia recomendado en el mismo. Miren, parte de las bondades de los vehículos de los fondos de inversión es que no existen un monto mínimo requerido para que el inversionista pueda participar. Y ese es justamente el caso de nuestro fondo Escala. No estamos exigiendo un monto mínimo para poder beneficiarse de la estrategia. El fondo tiene hoy un precio por título de $1.30. Eso es lo que cuesta el título de nuestro fondo hoy. Entonces, ustedes inversionistas pueden participar desde un título claramente en el fondo, ¿no? El tiempo de permanencia, ya lo mencionaban también Stephen y Alfredo, es importante ver al fondo con un horizonte de entre 3, idealmente a 5 años, ¿no? Si bien no existe un plazo forzoso de permanencia, es el horizonte de inversión que recomendamos ustedes consideren permanecer en el fondo en función de cómo está estructurado el portafolio y los bonos que conforman la estrategia. Me parece que sería buena idea, Alfredo, Stephen, si pudieran mencionar brevemente, de manera muy general, 4 o 5 nombres de bonos corporativos que traigamos en posición para que el inversionista tenga en mente la referencia de esto que hablabas hace un rato, de son bonos de la más alta calidad crediticia, son bonos calificados como AAA, son bonos de lo que conocemos en el argot financiero como high grade. ¿Qué nombres son los que están conformando la cartera del fondo?
Sí, con gusto. Steve, the question is the following. Could you mention some of the names and sectors that we're favoring in the strategy, the fundamental quality and the strength of these names so that people can relate to what they hold?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. We do like the banks. So like the Citibank, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, JP Morgan. So those are names that we favor, not only in this strategy, but across the firm. And the other is energy. And, if I can get Juan Carlos to go to page 14 right here, we do have a slide in here talking about energy and, strong relative performance in 2022. And we do have what we would consider an overweight to energy in here. So, just taking a look at the graph on the right, a couple things, and you see these sharp spikes. And when they go up, that's negative performance. Coming down is positive. So we take a look at the great financial crisis in 2008, the commodity crisis in 2016, 17, and then the dual shock here. That's a pandemic, right? The shutdown and everything there. But you see how much that's reversed itself. But when we take a look since 2006, the energy companies have really changed kind of their outlook and how they manage their companies, acting very conservatively, improving cash flow, deleveraging balance sheets, so taking debt off their balance sheet, improve liquidity. So they have really done a tremendous job from a corporate management standpoint. They still continue to reduce costs. And it continues to be an under-owned sector. When we do buy energy in here, we're looking at more of the high-quality energy because there is a lot of volatility within the sector. So think of companies like BP. Think of things like Royal Dutch Shell, and then we have a pipeline, which is one of our favorites, EPD here in the U.S. So still one of our favorite sectors is energy. Pharmaceuticals is another one. So think of like a Bristol Myers, a GlaxoSmithKline, a Gilead. Those are names that we like as well, that have, a good streamline of new products that are be coming out in good trial phases. So, some of the large kind of the benchmark type of names. We don't own like a Johnson & Johnson because that's essentially a AAA credit. We don't think that there's the fundamental side, which we think that the company is doing very well, versus the valuation. We just think it's not worth the cost to own a company like JP Morgan, or in the tech area, the Microsoft.
Correcto, muy bien. Nos están preguntando también acá nuevos inversionistas que cómo ubican el fondo, cuál es el ticker o símbolo del fondo en los mercados. Bueno, nuestro fondo se llama Escala, así tal cual lo pueden encontrar en el mercado, así lo pueden encontrar en nuestras diferentes plataformas electrónicas de negociación, así lo pueden mencionar y ubicar con sus asesores financieros. Recordándoles nada más, es un fondo que vive en el universo del mercado de dinero. O sea, es un fondo que invierte exclusivamente en instrumentos de deuda, en bonos corporativos. El 100% de sus activos son bonos corporativos americanos de la más alta calidad crediticia, son high grades, y son bonos que tienen plazos a vencimientos en promedio de entre 2 y 5 años. El plazo mayor de los bonos es de 5 años. La estrategia, como lo explicaba Stephen, es una estrategia, digamos, más estratégica, patrimonial, con una gestión no dinámica, y el objetivo del fondo es dejar que los bonos alcancen su máxima rentabilidad, que maduren, que lleguen al vencimiento, y en ese momento se incorpora un bono nuevo en función del proceso de inversión de Western Asset, que es quien nos ayuda a la selección de estos instrumentos.
Correcto.
Y bueno, me parece que hay una última por aquí. 2 más para cerrar de nuestro lado, Juan Carlos, a reserva de que ustedes quieran agregar algo más. La primera dice, si tenemos alguna perspectiva con respecto al oro y la plata este año, Y la segunda, creo que de alguna manera Stephen lo mencionó, pero no sé si quiera ser más reiterativo y resaltar la respuesta. Si tenemos incorporado el riesgo de una posible recesión este 2022.
David, ¿puedes repetir la primera pregunta? Se cortó un poco el video y el audio.
Gracias. Sí, la primera pregunta es si tenemos alguna visión sobre el oro y la plata este año. Y la segunda, si pensamos que hay riesgo de recesión.
Thank you. Gracias. Steve, there's two questions. One is regarding commodities, if we have any specific view on gold and silver. And the other one is, and I believe you mentioned that before, the possibility of a recession, which is not our case, our base case scenario. But if you could comment on both.
So, not having a direct call on, but, myself, we have analysts on commodities, but we do like the commodity companies like a BHP Pillarden. We don't own it in this portfolio currently, just doesn't have the liquidity profile, but, we do like commodities in here.
And the question on recession?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So on a recession, not our base case. We still think that, even though we did have a negative first quarter of growth in the U.S., and that could be pointed to some of the strong growth in the fourth quarter of 2021. But we still think we're going to be trend-like growth through this year. But 2-3%, but probably more in the 2% range than the 3% range. And then, like I said, that's an ongoing conversation that we have here is debating, are we going to get to a soft landing and avoid recession or not? But, right now we're looking at with inflation coming down, we're kind of, our models at Western are pointing toward inflation being in the mid to upper threes by the end of the year. So that's a pretty significant inflation coming, inflation downdraft throughout the rest of this year. So, if we start seeing that, we think that the Federal Reserve may not need to go as many times as priced in the market right now. So, let's have that ongoing conversation because, that changes pretty quickly. And especially with how the Federal Reserve, how quickly they have pivoted from one view to the next.
Perfecto, excelente. Bueno, pues me parece que estamos en tiempo, Juan Carlos. No sé si tú tengas alguna pregunta más de tu lado. De este lado, lo que yo tengo acá en el chat, están todas atendidas.
Correcto. No, por mi parte nada más. Creo que fue muy, muy valioso para todos. Creo que esta es una estrategia extraordinaria, ¿no? Que es única en el mercado, ¿no? Y solamente pues, la pueden adquirir a través de Actinver y de sus distintas plataformas. Alfredo, Stephen, thank you very much for this time, this opportunity to talk with Actinver's clients.
Gracias a ustedes por. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh no, I was just going to say it's my pleasure. We definitely understand how difficult the markets are right now, and we're more than happy to do this for you and your clients.
Lo mismo, reiterando el comentario de Steve, muchas gracias por la oportunidad de hablar con ustedes, explicarles cuál es la perspectiva de mercado de nosotros, un momento particularmente complicado en el mercado. No es la primera vez que vemos un momento de volatilidad. Las razones han sido distintas, como pueden ver en esta gráfica. Sin embargo, consideramos que los fundamentales de la categoría de activos son buenos. La calidad de los bonos que tiene el portafolio son muy altos. Hay buena liquidez en esos nombres. Sigue siendo un buen diversificador y el yield que está proporcionando, el ingreso que está dando en la cartera, sigue siendo atractivo. Nuestra recomendación es que siga siendo una asignación estratégica, como mencionó David, en los portafolios de mediano plazo y estamos a sus órdenes para seguir teniendo esta comunicación con ustedes y muchas gracias otra vez.
De acuerdo. Bueno, pues de mi lado no me resta más que agradecerles muchísimo, como siempre, Juan Carlos, toda su disposición, Alfredo y Stephen, el tiempo que nos dieron para esta presentación. Lo valoramos muchísimo, se los apreciamos bastante. Y pues bueno, les recordamos a todas las personas que lograron conectarse, a nuestros clientes inversionistas, que esta presentación está disponible en nuestras redes sociales, fue grabada y la podrán repasar las veces que ustedes quieran volverla a ver, incluso retransmitirla con sus familiares, amigos o colegas que no hayan podido asistir el día de hoy. Así es que muchas gracias de nuevo y muy buena tarde a todos.
Gracias. Hasta luego.